Page test, the bottom paragraph. We just spoke about the idea that if you have a sound body, the soul will automatically fill it. Like we said, if a person hurts themselves, there's some kind of kilkul in the goof, then as soon as the kilkul is healed, then without any need to force the soul or do any particular pa'ulas, the soul like rushes back automatically to the body, because we were trying to make a point that the body actually forces the soul to come down. Because we asked the question, does light shine? Seemingly, the concept of cause and effect is that the effect wants to be perpetually going up into its cause, and it's against its nature to leave and essentially descend. And so we're saying that something forces it to come out. We started this conversation by understanding that speech itself, right, forces its source in the koach hamaskil to give more shefa below, and so too the body forces the soul to leave its heavenly abode and come down. Then we said at the end of the class that there's an idea that sometimes it seems like you do need to do certain pa'ulas in the body to make the soul come down. It doesn't come automatically. Like we said, for example, a person faints, you bring them smelling salts. But we said, no, actually, that's also because the body gets extraordinarily weak at a certain point, and it's like a kilkul in the goof as well. As soon as the goof is like in a better shape, the body will come back. And we talked about having to have a proper balance between your ratzo and your shov. There's something also called the kiss neshikin of Misa, where certain tzaddikim, they had too much of a massive surge in their soul, which again, their body wasn't the kli for it. And then we said sometimes you can sort of do that, unfortunately, to yourself with an extraordinary ratzo, like Nadav and Avihu, that had this extraordinary ratzo, and therefore, as a response, they also brought too much light, and the body couldn't handle it. When in reality, we have to have the proper balance between the ratzo and the shuv. You do need to have an arousal in order to draw down extra light, but it can't be to the extent that you ruin yourself with this arousal, like the other three people that went into the Pardes with Rabbi Akiva. They also went into the Pardes, but they didn't go in with the proper mixture, and therefore they got into a Nadav and Avihu situation, and that's where we left off. You need to have the proper balance. So let's go now into this final chapter here, which is Hagam, the Kol Hashpa Tzrichlos Baratzon Dafka. Now, what we've been saying is that the soul is seemingly forced to come into the body. Now, that's peculiar, maybe without the bag, and then it'll be a bit less crunchy. Thanks. Thank you, sir. So then you have an issue, because kol hashpa tzrichlos beratzon dafka. Every hashpa has to be willing. You can't just force really somebody to give it over, right? The soul can't be actually forced to shine. We've been saying this language, it's forced to shine, it's forced to shine. But can you really force someone to shine, right? All hashpa has to be beratzon, has to be willingly. The kidua, as it's known, the ikar yuridas hashefa, that the main descent of all shefa, hu machmas hasimcha dafka, right? When do you actually shine? When you're besimcha, not when you're under duress. Excuse me. Right? There has to be a happiness, a willingness in the soul that you're excited to give over. So how could it be that there's this descent of the light of the soul, in order to come down and enliven the body, but by forcing the soul to do so? No one operates well when they're being cajoled and coerced, right? It doesn't really, you wish you could have forced people to come to class, but at the end of the day, they have to come willingly. And even if you could have forced them to come, they're not coming with their A game. It's not really the way that shefa and shining works. So how are we saying if it has to be basimcha and so forth, and the nefesh would rather be up in its source, basking in the ila, the cause, and not coming out into the realm of the effect, then how are we saying that the body forces the soul to come out? This seems like we're falling into yet another contradiction. And he says the inyan is, And we've discussed this. I kind of ruined this for us. But the be'emes zeu benefesh beratzon. This actually is willfully accomplished from the soul. The soul actually is game. It wants to come. Shechafetz v'rotze leired lahachayos aguf. It does desire to come down and enliven the body. Notice we've been saying the word forced, but the reality is that it's all in on this project. Why? V'hainu mitzad shanefesh margish es haor hanayla shel shoresh u'makar aguf. We've mentioned it many times in the last couple of classes, but here he finally says it inside. It's because the soul feels the high light that is the root and the source of the body, right? It's actually running, and as we see, the nature of light is basically it can't go fast enough. It's the fastest thing there is to shine, right? And it's doing it willingly because it actually realizes that its purpose is to go and illuminate this body because it's going to find that's the whole purpose of its existence. What is light there for? Right? Light is a revelation of the essence. Light, in other words, is like an essence junkie. Give me essence or give me death. This is basically light's motto. So the fact is, why is light running at the speed of light down away from its source? Is because it feels the essence down below in the goof. As we said, the body comes from the essence. And therefore, the whole purpose that there's even light in the first place is to reveal the essence. And there, how does it reveal the essence? The body's got the essence, and the job of the light is to run and reveal it. So therefore, it is searching for its source as it goes down. And therefore, even though we're saying that it's forced, it's only like sort of a terminology we've been using to explain how to get it. But the reality is that it wants very much to access its source, which is down below in the goof. Yeah.
So it's sort of like Rambam's thing where they can beat a guy who needs his wife again. Where it's like the actual work, like the genius route sounds actually that this is what it wants to be kind of like it was saying with Shabbos, like you're sort of brought into life against your will. It's like it's actually what the nefesh wants, but it needs kind of like a kick out of the nest.
Yeah, I suppose you could say that. I mean, it's an interesting analogy because over there's sort of a klippa, which is keeping the panemius will from shining. The guy's Yetzer Hara, right? In the case of like beating the guy up till he gets his divorce, gives his divorce. Here, it might be a little bit more refined than that. There is seemingly a chitzonius ratzon and a panemius ratzon as well. So there's definitely what's the chitzonius ratzon? I want to cling to my ila, right? But the panemius ratzon is I want to cling to my ila because I want to be in the highest possible devekas to Hashem. But lo and behold, the highest possible devekas to Hashem, my panemius ratzon is actually found by going down, right? So he says, he actually does want to go down and enliven the body. Here's your point exactly. It's called forced. Like we have been saying, you live against your will because you're sort of forced to be in this body. Why do we call it that if it's your deepest inner desire? It's because that will comes from the standpoint of the body. In other words, it's a will which is sort of constructed not from within the light itself. Similar to the divorce case, I guess you could say. I mean, in a certain sense, why does the guy want to stay married? He thinks it's in his best interest. He'd rather have a wife, even though he's not good to her, and she wants out, right? So it's a very similar case, and it says that the woman is forcing him to kick up his panemius ratzon, because it wouldn't have come from him. As far as he's concerned, he's sort of delighting in his own ratzo. The concept of shuv and coming down has to be dictated to him from outside. So therefore we say it's like you're forced. But the reality is, as you said, if the guy doesn't say rotza ani willingly, it's not a good divorce. So he does say rotza ani. I love it. Lo mitzar atzmo betivo yesh lo ratzon leired. It's not his own nature, without having an other reminding him and stirring up this interest in and of himself. He would not want to go down. Talking about the light. The betivo ratzonu lalos lamayla davka, because it's his nature to go up, right? This is what light does. As we said, its general, natural ratzon is to go always and sort of lose itself inside of its source. Rak b'pnei shemargish, turning the page. Es shoresh u'makar aguf. It's only because it feels. It's interesting. The light feels, right? It has this instinct that the root and the source of the body is higher. Who wrote lamata? Yes, he does want to come down below. Lahachayos zaguf. In other words, it is willingly, because he has this inner feeling that that's really what is the highest possible thing. It just didn't occur to him until the kli, or the goof, sort of emerged, and then he realized, wait a second, there's something greater than I can even imagine in my own process. And now we can understand why we say in that same Mishnah, against your will you die. Right? Because you can't take half the Mishnah and not explain the other half. If we're saying all the time, al karchach ata chai, so that the last thing you want to do is go down, then explain to me al karchach ata meis. Then explain to me why it says against your will you die. Right? In a sort of a simple, way of explaining this, just on a human level, it makes sense. Like, I'm in heaven. I just don't want to be bothered, basically. I'm fine, I'll live. And then all of a sudden you have a whole life, you live 120 years, you say, you're going to take me now? So fine, I'll die, like against your will. But how do you explain it according to the Panemius? He said, because once you've come into your body, because you have willingly realized that the source of God is found in the goof, then all of a sudden the last thing you want to do is leave that place. Right? So at first we said, against your will you live, because we're saying basically, until the body showed me that there's a higher level that where I can achieve on my own, I was looking to go up. Now that I've realized that I want the atzmus, which is found in the goof, don't take me from here, right? And then all of a sudden, against your will, you die. And what is he proving from here? Of course, it's willingly that the soul is in the body, because he doesn't want to leave once he finds there, because he's finally found the real gold. Let's just finish the paragraph, and then you have a question?
Yeah.
Let me just finish the paragraph. We'll go to the question 1 second. So why does he say against your will you'll die? Because he doesn't want to leave the body and go up all of a sudden. Even though that's his nature, right? Before there was a goof involved, because all of a sudden he's found mamish the jackpot, right? Why does the light want to go up? Because it wants elukus. It found in the body the jackpot of elukus. The mamish essence is found in the body. So all of a sudden it doesn't want to leave. It's a much, much higher level of light that can be attained, that the atzmus can reveal the essence of the light. And therefore the light wants to be around that. And that's, of course, after the advice says, against your will you die, which means you've already lived. You started at 13 years old, you started refining your body, refining it more and more. All of a sudden you've got this beautiful Beinoni body going on, which is basically means that you've actually honed and mined out of this body its true nature of the atzmus. Now that you have a refined body, for sure the last thing you want to do is leave it. Because once you refine your body, it shines the source of the body, which is the essence of Hashem, even more. So now, al karchach atames, against your will you die. Okay, Mendel, what's you got?
The nature of light is its source, but the purpose of light is to seemingly do the opposite.
No.
I mean, it's not the opposite ultimately, because it's actually the highest part.
It is the source. It's clinging to its source by going down.
But in its external awareness, it sees its source as being higher.
Before
it transcends its external awareness, quote unquote, its nature.
Well, because because what does it mean, its nature? It means when it's only looking at itself. When it comes into its view that there's an other, and that other bears even a higher source, then it actually desires to be close to the essence, which it finds now in the other. When it was only with itself, then it's almost like machshava, right? You want to, the more you meditate, the more you kind of go higher and higher in your own conception of what you thought your idea was, right? But the reality is there's a whole nother dose of this very idea, which as much as you're going to meditate, we said before you open your mouth and speak, before there's a kli, you're never going to get there, right? Because there's like a secret source of this very idea, which is when you're only dealing with at the idea level, it's like a closed vault. You don't even know that it's there. Only when you realize there's an other, all of a sudden speech emerges, then all of a sudden you want to speak, even though speaking is descending the idea into a new medium, which seemingly is totally, contrary to the thought. That's why most normal people or not Jewish people reading Ranat, when they want to concentrate, they don't speak, right? Maybe so we talked about before. Why in the library it's so silent? You can hear a pin drop. Only in a yeshiva we scream when we want to concentrate, right? It's a weird thing. Because you'd think that I want to get the quieter I am, the closer I'm going to get to my own source of this idea. But you realize that there's a hidden source of this very idea that only emerges when there's an other, which is basically represented by the speech. So all of a sudden now you desire to speak because if you're trying to get to the bottom of this idea, literally the bottom, a deeper essence of this idea comes out when this other emerges, which is seemingly totally. It's like a kli compared to the light, this faculty of speech, and yet it contains this secret of the koach hamaskil, the panemius of the koach hamaskil.
You have to go all the way up in order to be able to actually formulate exactly what you're trying to speak out, right? There has to be this process of inner meditation and ascent in your own mind in order to reach a place where you can properly, find the words.
We mentioned that when you, let's say, come to daven in avoda, right? Yes, if you preface your speaking in the davening with an hour-long meditation, then the speech reveals great mysteries. And even if you preface it with a tiny meditation, the speech reveals great mysteries. But if you preface it with no meditation and you just speak, then there's no magic there. Right? You do have to, the speech has to be an expression of what came before it. The deeper of what came before it, the more profound of an impact speech will have on it. But yeah, if you just have a kli with no light, you don't have anything. But if you have a light first, then the kli will amplify this light basically in an incomparably greater way.
So the light has to want to go up in order to come down.
I mean, you keep saying that. I think that's the nature of light. It wants to go up. Right?
If it wouldn't want to go up, then it wouldn't see that actually it would be the
Okay.
present.
Yeah. It wants to go higher and higher. The point is it realizes at some point lower is higher and higher. All right, you have a question? Okay, let's go on to the next paragraph. Page Yud here. Nimtza, and as I said, we're really closing in on the first mimer, which is a big accomplishment to finish a first mimer of Ranat. Let's see, we're not that close. Let's not pat ourselves in the back just yet. We still have to go down. Nimtza the sibas hamshachas v'yuridas or b'chayas hanefesh. It comes out that the cause of the drawing down of the light and life force of the soul, lahachayos aguf, to enliven the body, hu mitzad aguf. The body is what produces that desire. Because evrei haguf, the limbs of the body, mamshichim es hachayus, es chayos hanefesh. They draw down the life of the soul, lislavish besocho lahachayoso, in order to encloak into it and to enliven the body. They draw down the soul to enliven the body. And that is why, specifically when the light gets to the body, the soul gets to the body, there's an increase of chayas in the soul, right? In other words, your soul takes on sort of like a new power of being a soul when it's in its body, which is again strange, because seemingly usually when things go down, they get just like a beam of light, it gets less powerful, less strong, it sort of runs out, right? Anything, when you send it on its way, it goes further and further from the source, it goes dwindling down. That's called the Seder Hishtalshlus. Here we see when it gets into the body, suddenly there's this ramping up of the power of the soul. The Al Yidei Islavshus Hanashama Baguf Dafka, specifically when the soul goes into the body, Al Yidei Zeh Dafka Ba Nashama Lebechinas Yedias Elokus B'Muchash Mamash. So what exactly does it get that it's considered an elevation? It's kind of a funny thing, but we'll try and understand it. Suddenly, when the soul goes into the body, it has an appreciation for godliness, which in a way which we call B'Muchash, which means like a tangible, perceptible understanding of godliness, which means while it was yet in the spirit realm, it didn't get to the body yet, it was missing a certain understanding of godliness. What is the soul after all? It's interested in knowing God. So why do we say that when it's coming down from Atzilas, B'ri Yetzira, it's knowing God essentially less and less? Because as you descend, you have less comprehension as you go lower and lower through the worlds. But suddenly when it goes to the bottom of the world, the goof, we're saying that it picks up a certain type of comprehension. Now, it's not the comprehension that you're thinking. It's almost like we're comparing apples and oranges. It has even less comprehension if you're talking about the spiritual understanding of God. On the contrary, it's like bereft of any spiritual understanding of God. But it suddenly picks up a physical understanding of God, right? Which is like a brand new thing that even in Atzilus it didn't have. All its millions of worlds of descent, where it was picking up all different types of flavors of spirituality, it never had this conversation of a soul enclosed in a body that all of a sudden it can perceive God physically. Because before it came to the body, yes, it grasped God. Now, let's try and understand really what is so special about physically grasping God. First, we have to understand what's called the difference between the Metzias and the Mahus, which talked about many, many times. Let's put it to the test. What's the difference between the Metzias and the Mahus? First of all, the words kind of have a similar meaning in English, right? The Metzias is like the essence of the thing, basically. And then Mahus also, it kind of means like the essence of the thing. But what's particularly the difference between these two words? What does Metzias mean? Comes from what source? What's the root of the word Metzias? Limtso, to be found, right? What does Mahus come from? The word Mahus. Mahu. Mahus. Right? Mahu is, what is it? So there's the Metzias, which means that it is, it is found. It's a thing that is there. But you can have a thing that you know that it exists, but you don't know what it is, right? So the Mahus, what is it, is that you actually come into contact with the essence of the thing. The Metzias is that you know about that there is such a thing. And so, for example, we could say that an angel knows the Mahus of spirituality, but it only knows the Metzias of physicality, because an angel's never been Gashmi. And therefore, he doesn't know what Gashmius is. They're sitting there in the angelic world. They're opining about what does it mean to actually taste an apple, right? With your tongue. And they can only dream, just like we're sitting here and saying, what would it be like to understand God as an angel does? What is spirituality? How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? We'll sit here and talk about it. We'll never know the Mahus of spirituality while we're in physicality, right? But we do have the Mahus of physicality. Angels, it's opposite. They have the Mahus of spirituality, but they only have the Metzias. They only know that there is such a thing called physicality, but they don't know what it is. So the reality is that the Mahus of physicality, we're saying in a certain sense, captures the Mahus of Elokus in a certain unique and awesome way. In other words, what is God, for some strange reason, can be held in the physical world more than in the spiritual world. Now, we can discuss why this is. Let's look at it for a second. We mentioned before a principle that we actually learned from our very first father, Avram Avinu, in the Sefer Yetzirah, when he says, Na'ut techilasam b'sofam b'sofam b'techilasam. What does that mean? We had it inside. You guys have to do your chazara. Bam! There we go. Everybody's chiming in. I love it. So the beginning is wedged in the end, and the end is wedged in the beginning. This is a principle which, why does this make sense? If you think about sort of, I think someone gave an analogy one time in the class. It could have been me even, I don't remember. But if you're at the top of a mountain, right, or let's say there's a giant mountain, and you want to know like how big the mountain, what's really the scope of this giant mountain. If you're in the middle of the mountain and you look up, you don't understand the greatness of this mountain, right? Because you don't actually see the full reality of this beast, right? Because you don't have a perception of the top, because the top is only the top of the bottom. It's not the top of the middle only, right? So only when you get to the bottom can you perceive the true greatness of the top. And the same thing is the other way around, right? If I'm on the bottom, right, what makes something the bottom is the bottom of this top. So you can only really define the peak elevation of something with the lowest point of the thing. Otherwise, you don't really capture what the thing is. And that's what we say. The beginning is wedged in the end. What makes this the beginning? You'll only know that this is the beginning of what? When you get to the bottom of that thing, then I can see how great and grand the beginning really is. So even though the beginning and the end are polar opposites in terms of their value, right? Nonetheless, you understand the true greatness of the beginning only when you get to the end. And this is all summed up in this statement that we say, what is higher, higher falls lower, lower. The higher the thing is, the lower it can fall. So when you see something extraordinarily low, it means it's fallen from an extraordinary high place. And therefore, what we're saying is, if you really want to capture the essence of Hashem, you have to see how far it falls. You can't capture the essence of Hashem in the middle of the mountain, which would be where? Anywhere in the spiritual world. Anywhere in the spiritual world is in the process from getting to the beginning to the end. The beginning is the essence of God. The end is the lowest you can possibly get to, which is physicality, which is ein tachton lamata mimenu. There's nothing lower than it. So anything in the beginning does not really wholeheartedly embrace and capture that anything which is in the middle doesn't capture that which is in the beginning. You have to get to the end. And therefore the mohus of Elokus, the very essence of God, can only be found in Gashmias. And therefore, going back to our point, what does the soul pick up and sort of achieve by going down, 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 down? In the meantime, it's just getting further and further away from the peak of the mountain. It hasn't really achieved anything. But when it gets to the bottom of the mountain, it's now sort of defined the top of the mountain. Now I know what the mountain is. Because I got to the bottom, I have the whole scope of the full mountain. The beginning is wedged in the end. Right? And therefore, you suddenly have this mohus of Elokus. You can sort of tangibly hold on to God more when you're in a physical body than you can in any of the stages of the spiritual position in between. And therefore, the soul, that's what we're saying, the soul desires to come down because it picks up a brand new understanding of Elokus that it didn't have in any of the realms of Gan Eden that it previously was in. Right? Because when it was above, yes, it grasped God, but what aspect of God did it grasp? That there is a God. In other words, the Metzias. I know there's such a thing called the essence of God. I have no idea what it is. Even in Atzilus, I have no idea what it is. Even in Ak, I have no idea what it is. Even in the Or Ein Sof, I have no idea what it is, because everything's just like a ray coming from that essence. Where can I actually find that essence? The beginning is wedged in the end. So all of a sudden, you get to the end, you can actually say, okay, you have very little perception because you lost all the light, basically. So you don't really, in a certain sense, you don't anymore know much about this God, but you have him. And therefore, you pick up a yedias of the mohus of Elokus. When you pick up an esrog on Sukkot, and it's like God has found himself inside of this place, you don't know what you're doing. It's a physical action. There's not even a dimension of comprehension in a physical action. In other words, if you want to say, explain to me what it means, the actual physical action, it's sort of like you're talking apples and oranges. There's no meaning. It's just physicality, right? It's bereft of all meaning. It's just an act. And yet in that act, and on the contrary, because it's bereft of all meaning, it's like you've brushed away these meaningless rays of light, and you actually got the fruit itself. Now you don't know what it is. You can't have your cake and eat it too, but you have your cake. In physicality, you can grasp God b'muchash. Okay, it's a lot of talking right there on that one line, but is any of this sinking in a little bit? It means tangibly, basically physically. And when you're neshama above, having all this grasp, you're only grasping that it's there. But when the soul plunges into a physical body, you suddenly have a tangible understanding of God. This is like seeing God. And why does he say the word seeing here? Let's put our metaphors together. When you hear something and not see it, what are you getting from that thing? That it's there. But you don't know what it is, right? The way that hearing works, hearing is associated with Bina, for example. Bina is understanding. Gan Eden is called the realms of Bina. It's only understanding. You can have profound understanding of something, but you've never seen it. right? Whereas it says a picture's worth 1,000 words. If you see it, you might not have any understanding of it, but you got the whole thing. Whereas when you're understanding it, you're piecing it together. A sentence here, a sentence there. You don't have any vision of the actual thing, but you're sort of building it like a little miniature model in your mind. Every little piece of information that you hear starts to put a picture together. But thank you very much. Show me the picture. It's worth 1,000 words. Now, I don't know what the picture means. I'm looking at the thing. I don't know. I can't understand it, but I have it. I have the whole thing. Boom. Same thing with the spiritual presence of the soul in Gan Eden. It understands God, but it's not looking at God. It doesn't actually have God. It's just getting like rays from this thing that it understands that there is such a thing there. There's a Metzius called the God, and it's getting sort of all this information, and it's hearing that, and it's enjoying, the hearing of that is a tainuk in understanding. But when it gets down to the bottom, it's like you're face to face with the actual God. You might not understand anything, but you're looking at it. It's there. You can hold it in your hands. So this is likened to the concept of seeing Elokus as opposed to hearing Elokus when you come to the physical body. You following this? Anybody? Yeah? As is well known elsewhere. So too, when the soul comes into the body and does the actual fulfillment of Torah mitzvahs, in a physical body, which of course it cannot do Torah mitzvahs outside of the physical body. Why is that? Because there's no God there really, right? Why is it that suddenly when you get into this body, you can actually do the will of God, right? Because God's here, right? He's in the physical realm. That's why suddenly you can actually serve him. Not just understand him, you can actually unite with him. So when the soul comes into the physical body and starts to perform the actions of Torah mitzvahs, so now, after 120, 180 years, you served God with your physical body, you saw him, so to speak. Now you put your lulav and your esrog down. You go back to Gan Eden, because unfortunately until Tchias HaMesim, that's what happened. And now all the souls are coming around that haven't been in the body yet. They're like, what was it like? You saw the king? You actually held his hand? Your understanding, having seen Elokus, is a profound level that the higher beings can never appreciate. So again, you can see the soul gains, incomparably gains. You're the envy of all the neshamas and all the angels up there, having actually seen God in this world, because this is where he resides. Now you don't understand what you saw, so you go up there, Baruch Hashem, all there is understanding. But your understanding now is on a profound level of actually unpacking those 1,000 words that you saw from the picture. Even though before you came into the body, you're saying, what's the big deal? I was already in Gan Eden. I know what this place is like. No. Last time you were there, you were with all this profound understanding, you were profoundly understanding something that you never saw. You were just hearing the news. Not so when you go to Gan Eden after having been encloaked in the body. You've now come to be tangibly associated with God, seen the king, served the king. When you go back, as we said, your understanding is infinitely more profound. And why are we saying all this? Because we're trying to explain the soul gains infinitely by coming down. Now, up until it getting to the goof, the soul only loses and loses and loses by coming down. But when it comes to the bottom, i.e. it goes into the speech, or like we said, it goes into the goof, when it actually hatches into this foreigner and cloaks itself into there, then it winds up gaining suddenly. He says, have a look at that mimer there in Likutei Torah. And why is this all true? Because of this extraordinary quality of the body. Where he said, really, the true nature of the body comes from a source which is higher than the source of the soul. Right? The source of the soul is pretty awesome. It's like the light inside the sun, which is the highest light can be. But then there's the sun, right, which is infinitely higher than any light that comes from the sun, even the light which hasn't even left the sun yet. The source of light is basically nothing, bupkis, compared to the actual sun, right? So when these things come out, in other words, in their source, the sun is obviously higher than the rays of the sun. But then when things get inverted and sort of go down and reveal themselves down here, the sun, which is, what's the sun? The sun is basically above light, right? There's rays that shine from the sun. So there's sunlight. But similarly, the sun, at least in theory, is not shiny. Oftentimes we say that the difference between the essence of God and the sun is that the analogy breaks down here because the sun actually is shiny and the essence isn't. But let's just imagine for a second that the analogy is good, that there's something called the sun, which is the source of light, but it's not actually shiny. Sometimes they even say that, the guf hashemesh. And then there's the sunlight. So when you look at the sun, you think the sun is shiny because everything that comes out of the sun in every direction is light. So you think that the source is also light, but it's not. The source of the sun is basically something which is producing the light, but it itself is not light. Now, even before the light comes out, there's even light inside the sun, ready to come out, but that's also only light. There's something called the goof of the sun itself. Now, when these things sort of, again, invert themselves and reveal themselves in our world, it winds up being the opposite. You see the opposite. It's like a chotem, a seal, right? When you have a seal with the king's name engraved in it and you put it into wax, that which is indented, when you put it in the wax, it becomes protruded, and vice versa. When something comes out on the other side, it looks the opposite. So what are we saying? The body of the sun is beyond light. It precedes the light. The light has different levels of shininess, all the way up to the fact that it's the light inside the sun. When it comes down, the body is essence-like. Why? Because it doesn't have any light. There's zero light. It's not involved. It doesn't have a little bit of light. It has zero light. It's just gashmius. Why? Because it's a representative. It's a shliach of the goof of the sun, which is no light. And therefore, it's the lowest of all low things, and it's the bottom of the barrel. Whereas light becomes the big boy. Light is like the man, by the way. The body is the woman. So all throughout history, the man there's a patriarchy, there's a hierarchy. The man's on top, right? Because he's the light. And obviously light is more profound than body, which doesn't have any light to shine. It's basically a nothing. It's just a hole, right? That's what we call a woman. Nekeva, just a hole, right? So the idea is what? Because this is like an inversion, what you're seeing, right? The reality of the situation is that the source of the light inside the sun still doesn't hold a candle to the actual body of the sun itself. And so too it is when it inverts. That's why the soul is rushing to get into the body, because it senses what it always sensed to begin with. And it wants the essence. The essence is inside of the goof. And so this is the idea. When the soul essentially meets the goof, it winds up having this extraordinary experience of seeing the mohus of God, even though it doesn't really know what it is. There's no light there. That's the whole point. The mohus of God is beyond comprehension. It's beyond light. But nonetheless, when the light tastes that, and it goes back and tells its soul friends up in Gan Eden, they don't even believe what he's talking about, because he's actually touched on the essence of God inside of that goof. Therefore, by the soul descending, it winds up with this extraordinarily brand new level of light that the soul had never seen before. Okay, that's going to be where we're holding here. Only because we started 15 minutes late, we lost out. Please come on time, everyone. What happened today? We lost the light. We just one of the